Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Comfort Ride System here on our 2023 Palomino Puma Unleashed fifth wheel toy hauler. If you're planning on taking the whole family out in your trailer and you know you're going to be driving around a whole bunch, maybe you're putting a lot of miles on it and you want to make sure that you are not only mitigating and absorbing that road shock before it gets up to your tow vehicle, and you're wanting something that's going to put less strain on the tow vehicle because of that, then the Roadmaster Comfort Ride System is going to be the one that's going to check all those boxes. Now, this system comes with a couple different components. There is a little bit more that's going to go into this, but why don't we go ahead and just take the wheels off and get you a little bit of a closer look at it. So here's a look at our system without the wheels on. That way we can get a full view of it here. What we can see is that we have two slipper spring leaf springs, we have our slipper spring box, and then we also have our shocks mounted on the inside of our frame rail here. And what the whole goal of this is to separate our axles so that way that they're independently taking on that vibration or road shock whenever we're going over bumpy, gravelly roads or hitting a pothole. And then the after effect here is all getting absorbed with our shock absorbers, so that way it doesn't travel up the frame rail and then you're feeling it in your tow vehicle. Now, a good example of this is when you go to actually disassemble everything and you're lifted up by the frame and not the suspension, you'll notice your shackle straps will want to drop down just from the sheer weight of the axle, and especially if you still have the wheels on. And that can twist your axle a certain way. So one of the tips I'll provide later on when I'm doing the installation is, hey, if your axle's not lining up perfectly, when you're going to put on your U-bolts, you need to go to the other side and re-flip your shackle back over and reset the axle. So just think of that whenever you're hitting those bumps in the road and it's forcing that weight back and forth between the two, and all that shock is being forced onto both axles instead of just being dampened right on that first one. Now with the Comfort Ride system, that's going to be dampening it right here and hopefully eliminating it, or at least mitigating it to a point where it's not going to be a rough or unenjoyable ride when you're going out on your camping trip. Now, when picking out your system, there is a few different things you're going to want to take note of before you purchase anything. And the first one being your axle capacity. So you'll want to crawl under your axle and make sure that you're checking the axle tag. It's going to be a white sticker and it's going to list what your axle capacity is. That capacity is going to be used to determine the correct system for you, because the leaf spring size and everything needs to be exactly what you're going for. So anywhere from 5,200 up to 7,000 is going to be this specific system. There is 8K systems and a little bit lower too if you're in that 3,500 pound range as well. Now with this, you're also going to want to kind of look around, because there are other factors that can prevent you from being able to install it. One I've noticed on a lot of newer trailers is that they'll build in gussets that essentially is just a sheet of steel that they're going to weld to the frame rail, and then they're also welding it down to the hanger at an angle, and that angle is so wide out that it blocks the slipper spring box from being able to fully mount up flush with our frame rail. If you have that, you are going to want to reach out to Roadmaster, make sure measurement wise that you can actually have that fit, or you need to speak to your trailer manufacturer and see if you could possibly grind down the weld on that gusset or just eliminate it completely. Once you switch over to the slipper spring box, it is getting bolted up into the frame rail on both sides. So it's not like you're really putting a ton of pressure on the hanger anymore. It's mostly on the box itself, so it shouldn't be an issue, but you should definitely double check before you go ahead and just start cutting anything off. Along with that, I ran into an issue where, as I'm trying to drill up through here, we had hydraulic lines in the way. So we had to actually cut out this steel tube that was on top of here that they welded to hold the lines originally, because we don't want that bumping into our self-tapping screws, rubbing against it and getting damaged. Further over here, we have our U-bolts. 9 times out of 10, we are going to be replacing the U-bolts with longer ones. Roadmaster has a couple kits, and so does Dexter. If you want to pick some of those up, we have those here as well. I can tell you for 99% of the ones I'm doing, I'm always having to replace this, just because there's never enough threads for us to put on the bracket for our shock mount, and then also our tie plate for our U-bolts. So this was a case where originally we thought we weren't going to need it because there was quite a bit of threads sticking out originally, but the prior leaf spring stack that was on here was 5/8 inch shorter than our new leaf spring. So unfortunately, we did have to switch over and get new U-bolts as well, but typically anytime you undo the U-bolts, you really should just replace them anyway. You'll want to pick up some red and blue Loctite because it's not provided in your kit, but it is required. They want you to use red Loctite on your shoulder hanger bolts, and then also blue Loctite on your bolts, your self-tapping screws that are going into your slipper spring box. So that's something you will want to pick up ahead of time. That way you're not last minute finding out you got to go make a run to the hardware store. It is also a good opportunity while you're installing the system to maybe replace some of your other components, because at this point we are basically redoing the entire suspension of the trailer. So you're already taking all of these parts off, so it's a great time to just add stuff in right now. Our neighbor today got the MoRide cross members. Now typically MoRide recommends doing it across all 3 hangers, but in our case with the slipper spring box, you cannot use it with that box. You'll have to only use it on the outer hangers. So we've got this one already installed. I'm going to be doing the other one just a bit later. But essentially what this is almost like an anti-sway bar. It's shoring up your frame rail, because you're now adding a cross member between it, because the 2 frame rails will want to sit there and kind of twist back and forth as the weight shifts in your trailer, especially as your suspension compresses and decompresses. So when you're taking those turns and you're starting to kind of lean more to one side, this is going to help kind of draw you back over, so that way you're not too top heavy and tipping over. So it's just going to give you a much more stable ride quality here. And since we're already replacing our bolt with a wet bolt, it's perfect time to just go ahead and do that too. Now, one thing I will say is, if you are switching over to a wet bolt, make sure that you're also picking up some bronze bushings to go along with it, because in the leaf spring, they're only giving you a nylon bushing, and that's not going to be compatible with the grease. As far as installation goes, this one can be a little bit challenging. There is a lot of tools involved. Not so much specialty, but just you need a lot of different sockets and wrenches just to get everything in place here. You can do this on the ground, but for portions of it you will need to lift up the frame because you will have to have your wheel off for a small portion of this. But depending on which style of system you're going with, if you are going with the full kit, you can leave the wheels off. But if you are going with just the shock mount kit, then you will want to make sure that you have those wheels on and you have the pressure on your suspension, so that way you can get your angle correct when you are mounting up your shocks. Other than that, realistically, you could do this out at a storage lot, or if you have a lot of space in your neighborhood, doesn't have a mean HOA. But this is something probably that might be a little bit too much for most. And in that case, if this is something that you don't feel comfortable doing on your own, then please feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code to find a shop near you and get it professionally installed. If you are wanting to do this yourself, then please stick around and I'll walk you through the process. I'm going to be starting out by removing the 3 bolts that run through our hangers. So we've got one right here, one in the center, and then one down here. And then we can also knock out the 4 nuts that are holding on the U-bolts that hold our leaf springs to our axle, and then we can just grab the whole leaf spring and equalizer all out at once and toss that to the side and get ready to start hooking up our new suspension here. So to do so, we're going to be using a 13/16 wrench on the bolt head side, because we don't want this to spin around in our hanger. There's splines that are cut into the bolt right under the head here that bite into this, and then that prevents it from spinning around, because we don't want this to kind of waller out here. We want this to be nice and tight. We want it to have the rotation on the inside here where the leaf spring actually meets up with that in the bushing there. So make sure that you have a wrench on that so that that can't spin. And then on the back side here for the nut, I'm using an 11/16 socket. Now these tool sizes I'm using might vary depending on your trailer, but this is typically what I find to be the most common. Since we're not going to be reusing any of this hardware, I would keep a little trash box with you. Just toss everything in it as you're going. Make your cleanup a whole lot easier at the end here. But now with those nuts off, we're going to get under here. We're going to put some hearing protection on, and we are going to hammer on the thread side of our bolt and pop those out, and then that will release it enough to where we can get down and start working on those U-bolts too. Now right now we're getting a lot of tension from the leaf spring, so it's not fully popping out. So I've got a hole punch here I'm going to use. Pop that out the rest of the way. Alright, now we can start taking off our U-bolts here. loose enough. With all the nuts off, we can now knock our U-bolts down. With our U-bolts out of the way, now we can lift our suspension out. Next, we're going to take our slipper spring box and one of our 9/16 bolts. We're going to slide this up into position, and then we can mark out on our frame rail where we're going to need to drill holes for our mounting screws. Now, I'm going to put the nut on the back, but I'm not going to actually tighten it down. Just give it a couple threads to make sure that this doesn't fall out on us. And you can see right next to our frame rail here, we have the underbelly. On some models, that underbelly falls all the way across here and gets screwed in. If that is the case for you, you want to make sure that you cut it right where the box is going to be. So typically you do the same exercise here, and then just mark out the underbelly that you need to trim out, drop it back down, and then you can cut it out with just a utility knife typically. But I'm going to grab a paint marker, and on the bottom here, we're going to have 2 slotted holes, and that's what I'm going to mark. But I want to make sure that I have the slipper spring box kind of centered on our frame rail here, because there is a little bit of play back and forth here. And then I'm just going to mark that whole slot, and we can remove our bolt here. And now we've got our lines picked out for where to drill. I'm going to use a center punch first, get us a good spot to start drilling so that our bit won't walk. And I'm going to get this in the center, but I also try to get it away from any kind of center of the I-beam here. So if you don't have a boxed frame, you do have an I-beam frame, make sure you're not super close, because then you'll end up drilling into the center of the beam instead. Now that we have our holes marked, we're going to need to drill a 21/64 hole, but before we can do that, I'm going to work my way up, starting out with an 1/8 inch drill bit and just kind of skipping every other size until I get up to this, just to make it a little bit easier. If you sit here with the 21/64, you'll probably end up just burning it out or having it break off on you just from using it too much. So working your way up can make it a lot quicker. So I started drilling and then realized, hey, we've got a piece of tubing right here. What's running through that? So if you look a little bit further down, we have hydraulic lines running through this tube. And what they did was they just welded this tube in place so that way it would protect the lines over the suspension. Now, the only problem with that is we need to drill up through there, and I don't want to risk puncturing one of the hydraulic lines with my screws or with my drill bit. So what we're going to do is kind of cut out a piece of this, see how much we really need to take out, and then I'm going to wire loom clamp it up higher, just to kind of get it out of the way, so that way right where we need to drill through, I don't have to worry about it. So I'll probably cut out a good foot section of the top here just to accomplish that, and we'll have to do that on both sides. Now this is probably something that you're not going to typically have to do in most cases. This is the first time I've ran into this situation myself. So you might find some things that are going to block you from needing to do it. Make sure that you really kind of give yourself a once-over and figure out everything that you're going to need to do before you decide to start installing your Comfort Ride and then realize, hey, now I've got all these other problems I got to try and figure out as well. But now that we're at that point, I've drilled out each of my holes. And if you're getting the full kit where it's both the slipper spring box and the shocks, you're going to have a bunch of extra self-tapping screws because of the shock kit. So if you buy just the shock kit aside from the slipper spring box, it's also got mounting brackets that would go up to the frame rail, and you'd need a bunch of these to actually mount all those up. So what I like to do is just run one of those through each of these holes here beforehand and have it cut those threads, so then when I go to shoot these in there, I'm not having them get caught and then break off on me, and then we have a whole nother issue to deal with. But with all that said, we're going to want to get these prepped up. We're going to use some blue Loctite, and we'll get these all goobed up here. We're gonna need one of our 9/16 bolts, the nut that goes along with it, and then 2 of our flat washers, and then the shorter stubby spacer that we have. And that's gonna sit on the inside here of our box with the bolt going through it, and a flat washer on both the bolt head side and the nut side. So we can just get that all kind of prepped and ready to go. Bring our box up in. I'm going to slide the bolt in just a little bit so that the threads are help holding it up. Then we can slide our spacer. Get that all lined up. And like I said, we'll throw a flat washer and then our lock nut. I'm not going to fully tighten this down just yet. Just get that on to help hold the box up in place. And now you can kind of make sure that you have your box sitting correctly. You really want to make sure that you have this just perfect, because this needs to be in line with our spring stack. So if you don't have that up with your spring center here in line, when you go to put on your leaf springs, it's going to want to fight you the whole time. I'm going to be using a 9/16 socket here to put these in with, and I'm going to get under it so I can kind of get a better look at it, make sure that I am lining up perfectly on both sides. And you really want to kind of go slow. Don't fully tighten these down just yet, because you want a little bit of wiggle room to adjust it if it's not perfectly straight. Feels like it's right on. Let's double check with the release spring. Yep, all right. Good on this side. On this side. So now we'll come back. I've only got like a thread or 2 left on these bolts to tighten them up. That's where I'll just come in with the torque wrench and fully tighten it down the rest of the way. If you go at this with the impact or anything like that, it's really easy to bust the head off of this bolt, so I really don't recommend going too hard on it. Next, we're going to take 2 of our 7/16 bolts and nylock nuts along with 2 spacers, and these are going to go in these bottom holes right here. This is what our hook end of our leaf spring is going to sit on. So we can pop this into place, and I've been noticing just recently it's almost like the powder coating is too thick on these to where it's kind of wanting to fight you. I've had to kind of pry against these a little bit. Slot our bolt through, and then that nylock nut on the back, and we'll repeat that over on the other side. And now if this is the first axle you're doing, if you haven't done the other side, what happens a lot of the time is your equalizer and your shackle straps will want to flip down just because of the weight being off of it, and the whole axle is kind of hanging down since we're lifting up by the suspension. If that happens to you, whichever one you're working on, go to the other side. You can take a little floor jack or something like that and lift up on the axle, and then with a pry bar you can kind of stick it in between the shackle straps and flip it back up as you're cranking up with the jack. And that'll flip that back over, and it'll make it sit right, because what happens is the whole axle will start to turn, and then the nut that's on the bottom of our spring stack is not going to line up with the hole in the spring seat on our axle tube. So flipping that over and make it a lot easier on you, then you're not sitting there fighting it the whole time. But at this point now we can also throw in the bolts up here and start working on our U-bolts. I'm going to start on the U-bolt side first, and we'll get that kind of cranked down. Although sometimes it is a little bit of a fight. So right now, this is a little bit higher than what I really need it to be. I'm going to probably have to drop it. And that's why I said having a hydraulic jack is a little bit better, because then you can kind of control it, because right now our eyelet's way up here. We need to bring that down to here. And that, once we bring that down, it's going to try to lift up here. So I take that back. I'm going to start out with our bolts here. And we're also going to need this spacer right here. This is going to ride on our leaf spring stack here, and that's going to help prevent it from popping back out. It's going to lock it into our slipper spring box. So if you want, you can get that lined up, throw in your 9/16 bolt, and then a flat washer, or not flash washer, a nylock nut. The only one that's going to get a flat washer is that center one. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to do the same thing over on our other side. Go. But we'll get these up here. Being careful, watch any of your wiring. So we've got our electric brake drum right here, and I've got wiring right next to it. So we'll have the U-bolt go through our bracket from our Roadmaster Comfort Ride kit. You want to make sure that that little arm right there is pointing towards the center, right at our slipper spring box, and it's on the inside of our frame rail. So I'm gonna slot that on, and then we'll throw on our tie plate. And I'm gonna get a nut on one of these to start, and then we can get the other U-bolt in place. I'm going to run these down just a bit, but I want to make sure that I'm crisscrossing here. So I'm going to go across, cross, and back. And I'm also going to make sure that I'm keeping an even amount of threads between each one of these. Now we can switch over to our torque wrench. And with this, I like to go about 10 foot-pounds and then swap. And if you don't know exactly what your torque rating is going to be for your U-bolts, on the back page there is a nice little guide that Roadmaster put. It'll tell you, depending on the thickness of the U-bolt, and even by certain brands. One more. Now if that side's done, I'm going to just repeat this over on our other axle. Now our Comfort Ride kit's typically going to come with a standard bolt for our hangers, but in this case our neighbor's also adding on a MORryde cross member. That cross member is going to shoot across, and the way that it mounts up is by bracketing on with the bolt through our hanger. So this is going to come with a little bit longer of a bolt just so it can accommodate this bracket, plus also this spacer that we have here that our nut would go against. So the way that this is going to work is we will have to hammer this in. We're going to need to make sure that the teeth that we have on here are biting in, and you can even see on this hanger right here the little teeth marks all around the circle here. As that bites in, it prevents the bolt from moving around, and that is what we want. We don't want that bolt kind of wobbling around and eventually tearing out the metal here in our hanger, and then we have a loose suspension. So what I like to do is I've got a 9/16 socket that I've just hammered on over and over throughout the years of doing this, and you can see the front of it's all beat down. I'll slot this in, and then I'll use this to hammer on because I have a grease zerk fitting here and I don't want to hit that and break it. So this gives me good coverage over the head of the bolt without accidentally hitting that zerk fitting. So I'm going to hammer this in. Now there may be a point where I'll get, and it's not really wanting to sink in anymore, and we need to switch over to tightening down the nut on the back side. And that's going to help kind of close up any gap that we might have, because as you're hitting this, it's going to want to kind of just reverb right back on you and not fully go down. So I'm going to get this bracket in place. I'm going to have that spacer on, and then we'll hammer this in and get it to fully seat. I will have to put on the other components with this bracket as well at this time. and then we can get back to going through our comfort ride. One thing that Roadmaster does want also with this, before we get too far ahead, is they want you to put red Loctite on these bolts. So we will do so right now. Get that all nice and ready. Slot it in. Slide on our bracket, our spacer, and then our nut. Now I'm just going to tighten this as much as I can with my hand, and then we'll start hammering down. As it starts to bite in, you'll want to come back on the nut side and just keep tightening that down. All right, I am going to hit this a couple more times just to see if that'll fully seat now. Good. Now I'm going to back that nut off just a bit, and we will torque it down afterwards. I am going to line up my bracket a little bit better too. So now at this point I am going to come back and torque down my bolts on our slipper spring box. I'm going to start with the center one, then the two outer ones, and then move down to our lower ones, the 7/16 bolts. So for this, on the larger bolts, we're going to need a 13/16 wrench to hold on the bolt head side and a 7/8 socket to torque down the nut side. For our next part, we're going to be picking up some of our last bits of hardware here in our extension plates. Now with the extension plates, these are spaced just slightly larger on one of the end holes, and that's where the shock absorber is going to bracket into at the bottom. These other three holes are going to be part of a set depending on which way your axle is. So if your axle would be above your leaf spring stack, you want to make sure that you're using the two middle holes. If your leaf spring stack is above the axle instead, then we're going to be using the top two. So this will slot on right on top, and we'll have a 1/2-inch bolt that's going to go with that. Now it's really easy to mix these up because these will start to thread on, but we want to make sure that we're not mixing up our metric bolts with our 1/2-inch bolts. If you look at the nuts on it, they're a lot bigger, and they've also got a white or more of a yellowish kind of nylock part in there. On the M12 bolts, it's going to be a blue nylock nut, and it's going to be much shorter. So like I said, these can start to thread on one of the bolts, but the nut won't work on the other one. It's really easy to confuse these if you don't have them all set out nice and neat. So make sure that you have your hardware set properly so you don't mix and match any hardware there and then run into some issues further on down the road. But for our extension plates, I'm going to throw back my M12, and we're just going to be using our 1/2-inch hardware. We're going to put these two bolts through, and then we'll have the nut on the inside. And to tighten it all down, we're going to be using a 3/4-inch socket and wrench. Then we can come back with our torque wrench. Now with our shock, I'm going to start with the upper bolt first. It's a little bit easier getting that one on and then trying to get the bottom on, in my opinion. What we're going to do is take our M12 bolt along with a flat washer. We'll slot that through. We'll throw on another flat washer, one of our spacers, a wedge washer, and then we're going to put this up into our slipper spring box. And on the inside, we're going to have another wedge washer, and then also a flat washer, and then our nylock nut. Now with those wedge washers on the outside here, we're going to want the bottom that's fatter to be facing towards the same angle as the bottom of our shock, and then on the inside we're going to have the opposite. We're going to have the skinny part facing down towards the bottom of the shock and the fat side facing up, and that creates a little bit of a tilt so that way it can match up with this flat side of this box and then the angled side of our extension bracket. Now for the bottom side here, and with the top still loose, we're going to be placing another M12 bolt with a flat washer. After that we'll have our rounded spacer, another flat washer, and then we're going to bring our shock over. So I'm going to slide this back so just the few bit of threads are showing, and slot that through. Then we'll throw on another flat washer and a nylock nut. And at this point we can tighten these both down and then remove our band. But before I do that, I'm going to get this other side all set up and then we'll tighten it all down at once. Alright, I've got my fingers kind of holding this. I'm just using my ratchet to snug it down just a bit. That way we can get these wedge washers locked in the right position here. But I think I'm at a point now where I'm going to have to use my wrench. It is kind of hard to hold all of this at once, so you may have to kind of play around with this, get a little bit set, and then switch over and maybe re-loosen it and retighten it again just to get it to where you got these facing the right way. Alright, I've got these all snugged down. I've got my wedge spacers angled the correct way now. Like I said, it really is just a little bit of time and patience of slowly snugging down the nut and bolt while also holding those two wedge spacers so that they're sitting correctly. But now we can torque these. And I'm going to start with the lower ones. We'll get in there. Now, since we've got this whole side done, we can pop on our grease gun, make sure that we lubricate our wet bolts here. Now, I know in the normal kit that wouldn't be a thing to do, but in our case it is this time, so get a couple good squirts in there. All right. And then we're just going to repeat this same process over on the other side to complete our installation. Well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the Roadmaster Comfort Ride System here on our 2023 Palomino Puma Unleashed fifth wheel toy hauler. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension upgrade for your Puma, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.